Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Before the bullets flew, the real war was fought in the shadows. Beneath the roar of revolution, a silent battle raged, a world of invisible ink, code wheels, and whispered secrets. While books spotlight the generals and battles, few know the true power that turned the tide: espionage. Picture a double agent sipping tea in a British uniform while secretly funneling intel to Washington. Imagine a young woman delivering secret messages sewn into the hems of her dress. The American Revolution wasn't just won on the battlefield, it was masterminded in hidden rooms by ordinary people risking everything to pass on a scrap of parchment. From mysterious ciphers to secret societies, this is the story of how spies saved a revolution. The American Revolution was not simply won on battlefields. It was also waged in shadowy corners, whispered conversations, and coded messages. While muskets and cannons made headlines, the real weapon that helped tip the scales in favor of the colonies was intelligence. In many ways, the revolution was just as much a war of information as it was a war of arms. At the outset, the American patriots faced overwhelming odds. The British military was a global powerhouse, disciplined, experienced, and well-equipped. The colonial forces, on the other hand, were a patchwork of militias and volunteers, often short on supplies, training, and manpower. For the Patriots, direct confrontation was a losing strategy unless they could gain a critical advantage. That advantage would come through espionage. The Continental Army and its supporters developed increasingly sophisticated methods of intelligence gathering. Spying networks emerged, especially in and around British-held New York City, one of the most crucial strategic centers of the war. Among the most famous of these was the Culper Ring, organized under the direction of George Washington and managed by Major Benjamin Tallmadge under the alias John Bolton. This network consisted of everyday citizens, farmers, merchants, tavern keepers who risked their lives to pass along British troop movements, supply shipments, and strategic plans. These spies used clever methods to conceal and transmit information. They employed invisible ink, coded messages, dead drops, and even laundry signals, like hanging specific articles of clothing in a certain order, to pass intelligence undetected. Communication was often routed through multiple channels to reduce the risk of exposure, and aliases were used to protect identities. Many members of the Culper Ring were known only by numbers. Washington, understanding the critical role of intelligence, personally oversaw much of this activity. He insisted on accurate, timely information and recognized that misinformation or even the absence of intelligence could prove fatal. Under his leadership, American forces were able to avoid traps, exploit weaknesses in British lines, and even deceive the enemy about their own numbers and positions. Perhaps one of the most dramatic examples of intelligence's importance came with the capture and execution of Major John Andre, a British officer caught carrying secret documents about Benedict Arnold's betrayal. Andre's capture exposed Arnold's plan to surrender West Point to the British, a move that could have changed the course of the war. That single act of espionage, and its prevention, underscored how high the stakes were in the intelligence war. Espionage also had a psychological impact. It introduced an element of uncertainty and paranoia into British ranks, forcing them to second-guess their own security and the loyalty of those around them. For the colonists, the success of these secret operations boosted morale and demonstrated that cleverness and courage could stand up to imperial might. The American Revolution showed that wars are not only won by superior firepower, but also by information, gathering it, protecting it, and using it strategically. In a conflict where the odds were stacked against them, the Patriots turned to intelligence not as a supplement to warfare, but as a decisive force. It was this hidden battle, fought in coded letters, shadowy alleys, and quiet whispers, that helped secure the freedom of a fledgling nation. Early in the Revolutionary War, the American cause teetered on the edge of collapse. The Continental Army, though passionate, was plagued by inexperience, limited resources, and, critically, a lack of reliable intelligence. Time and again, American forces found themselves outmaneuvered, ambushed, or forced into retreat, not just because the British were stronger, but because they were better informed. The British, with centuries of military tradition and global reach, operated with remarkable coordination. Their commanders often had accurate maps, detailed intelligence on troop locations, and insight into colonial plans. This advantage was bolstered by a network of loyalist informants, American colonists who remained faithful to the crown and willingly passed information to British officers. These loyalists lived in cities and towns throughout the colonies, embedded in the very communities fighting for independence. They provided everything from troop movements to supply routes, to the names of rebel leaders. This insider information gave British forces the upper hand in several early engagements. In contrast, the Continental Army's intelligence efforts were disorganized and underdeveloped. Commanders often relied on rumors or second-hand accounts. Troop coordination between colonies was inconsistent, and the lack of a centralized intelligence system led to miscommunication and missed opportunities. For instance, during the ill-fated invasion of Canada in 1775-76, American forces suffered from overconfidence and poor logistical planning, partly because they lacked real-time intelligence about British strength and terrain conditions. It quickly became clear to leaders like George Washington that military strength alone wouldn't win the war. The British weren't just winning with guns, they were winning with information. If the Americans couldn't close that gap, the revolution might fail before it ever gained momentum. This realization marked a turning point. Washington, always a student of warfare, began to understand the critical role of espionage and counterintelligence. He started investing in spies, scouts, and networks of trusted operatives. What followed was the slow but deliberate construction of a clandestine infrastructure that mirrored and eventually rivaled Britain's. Washington's shift toward intelligence was not just strategic, it was revolutionary. In a war that pitted an untrained militia against a world superpower, information became the great equalizer. From this urgency emerged a new breed of patriot, one who fought not with a musket, but with coded letters, forged documents, and whispered secrets passed in the dark. These early lessons in failure, these costly missteps born from ignorance, pushed the Americans to think differently. They learned the hard way that to win a war, you had to know your enemy, and that knowledge more than numbers could change the fate of a nation. Out of sheer necessity, the American Revolution gave birth to a new kind of warfare, one that didn't rely solely on battlefield valor, but on stealth, deception, and subterfuge. As it became clear that conventional tactics wouldn't be enough against the British war machine, a quiet evolution took place within the ranks of the Patriot leadership. Under the steady hand of George Washington, intelligence work transformed, from a scattered, desperate effort into a calculated and professional strategy. Washington, himself a former surveyor and master of terrain and logistics, recognized that wars are not only won with bullets and bayonets, but also with secrets. He began cultivating a culture of espionage that valued discretion, cleverness, and above all, loyalty. He encouraged the use of secret couriers who could move through enemy lines unnoticed, often under the guise of tradesmen, farmers, or even loyalist sympathizers. These messengers carried coded letters, written in invisible ink or concealed within everyday objects, that revealed British troop movements, supply shortages, or planned raids. But the Patriots didn't stop at gathering information, they weaponized it. Washington's operatives became masters of disinformation, feeding false reports to the British to mislead and misdirect. Fake deserters would confess carefully crafted lies to British officers. Bogus documents would be planted where enemy spies were sure to find them. At times, entire troop movements were staged to convince British forces to divert their attention or delay an attack. One of the best-known outcomes of this shadow war was the creation of the Culper Spy Ring, a covert network operating mainly in British-occupied New York. Members used aliases and code numbers to hide their identities even from each other. They passed intelligence using dead drops, buried notes in hollow tree trunks, and communicated through subtle signals, such as the positioning of laundry on a clothesline. Even women, often overlooked as threats, played key roles as informants. And messengers, people like Anna Strong, who used a black petticoat and handkerchiefs to signal the presence of new intel. This underground web of spies was not a glamorous operation. It was dangerous, lonely, and often thankless. If caught, spies faced execution, and many operated for years with no recognition. But their work was invaluable. They allowed Washington to anticipate enemy moves, avoid disasters, and seize key opportunities. When British forces miscalculated, it was often because they had been deliberately misled. And when the Continental Army succeeded, it was often because someone, somewhere, had risked everything to deliver the right information at the right time. This shift toward intelligence-based warfare marked a defining moment in the revolution. It proved that survival wasn't just about firepower. It was about being smarter, more adaptive, and more determined than the enemy. In the shadows, beneath the roar of musket fire, a quiet battle raged, and the Patriots were learning how to win it. In 1778, with the American Revolution deep in its most uncertain phase, George Washington took a bold step that would forever change the way wars were fought. Realizing that battlefield victories were often decided long before the first shots were fired, he authorized the formation of the Culper Ring, a covert intelligence network that would become one of the most successful and secretive spy organizations in American history. The mission was clear but incredibly dangerous. Gather intelligence from deep inside British-occupied New York City, the enemy's headquarters in North America. The city was swarming with British troops, loyalists, and informants, making it one of the most perilous places for any patriot. And yet, this is where the Culper Ring would thrive, right under the enemy's nose. The ring was organized by Major Benjamin Tallmadge, using the alias John Bolton, under Washington's direct supervision. Members were selected not for their military experience, but for their trustworthiness, discretion, and access to useful information. Many were ordinary civilians, farmers, merchants, tavern owners, who blended seamlessly into the fabric of daily life. Their unassuming roles were precisely what made them so effective. Key figures in the ring included Abraham Woodhull, alias Samuel Culper Sr., who traveled into New York City under the pretense of visiting his sister but was actually gathering detailed intelligence on troop movements, supply chains, and British morale. Robert Townsend, Samuel Culper Jr., a merchant and journalist with access to high-ranking British officers and loyalist circles. He became the ring's most prolific source of information. Anna Strong, who used her clothesline to communicate coded messages, hanging a black petticoat alongside handkerchiefs to indicate meeting locations or new intel ready for pickup. The Culper Ring employed cutting-edge espionage techniques for their time. They used invisible ink, developed by Washington's chemists, to write between the lines of seemingly mundane letters. They created numerical codes and aliases to protect identities. Washington himself was 711 in their codebook. Information was often passed via dead drops, where messages were hidden in prearranged locations to avoid face-to-face contact. Every precaution was taken to avoid detection, because capture meant certain death. Their intelligence proved invaluable. The Culper Ring exposed Benedict Arnold's treason, uncovered British plans to counterfeit continental currency, and provided a steady stream of reliable updates on troop deployments and strategies. Washington trusted their reports so deeply that he sometimes made strategic decisions based on their intel alone. But perhaps what made the Culper Ring most extraordinary was its longevity and secrecy. Unlike many spy rings of the era, it was never compromised. British intelligence, despite their best efforts, never fully uncovered the network. In fact, the true identity of some members wasn't revealed until the 20th century, proof of just how tight-lipped and loyal its operatives remained. The Culper Ring didn't just pass along secrets. They helped shape the outcome of the war. Their work, though carried out in silence and often in fear, gave Washington the edge he needed to keep the revolution alive during its darkest hours. In a war where information was as valuable as ammunition, the Culper Ring was the Patriots' most powerful hidden weapon. At the heart of the network was Abraham Woodhull, who operated under the alias Samuel Culper Sr. A quiet farmer by appearance, Woodhull used his unassuming life as a perfect cover, traveling into New York to collect details from British officers and loyalist circles. Working alongside him was Robert Townsend, codenamed Culper Jr., a merchant embedded deep in the city who had access to top-level conversations and military plans. But one of the most ingenious members was Anna Strong. Her role? Communication. Using nothing more than a clothesline and strategically placed garments, she sent coded signals to fellow operatives, black petticoats and handkerchiefs that marked meeting points and drop locations. This simple yet brilliant method helped coordinate the movement of sensitive intel without uttering a word. The Culper Ring used dead drops to pass messages, hidden in hollowed-out logs or buried beneath fences. Letters were laced with invisible ink that only revealed their secrets when exposed to heat or special chemicals. Every technique was designed to protect the network and its mission. Absolutely. The Culper Ring was a silent yet formidable force, instrumental in shifting the tide of the revolution. Through their tireless and risky work, they provided George Washington with critical intelligence that shaped the course of the war. Their efforts allowed Washington and his commanders to make informed decisions that often turned the tide in key battles and thwarted British plans, securing the survival of the nascent United States. One of their most significant achievements was uncovering Benedict Arnold's treasonous plot to surrender the strategic West Point to the British. Arnold, once a celebrated American hero, had secretly negotiated with the British for a substantial sum in exchange for turning over the fort. But thanks to the Culper Ring's intelligence, specifically Abraham Woodhull and Robert Townsend, Washington learned of the plot in time, ultimately foiling the betrayal. Arnold's treason could have severely crippled the American cause, but instead, the timely revelation allowed Washington to make swift decisions that kept the fort and its critical strategic position in American hands. The Culper Ring also played a pivotal role in preventing a British ambush of the French fleet. In 1780, the French had sent reinforcements to aid the American cause, but the British were poised to strike. The Culper Ring intercepted critical information about British movements, which allowed the Continental Army and the French forces to work together to thwart the surprise attack. This was a crucial moment, as French assistance would prove essential in tipping the balance of power in favor of the Americans. Without these unsung heroes in plain clothes, who risked their lives to relay messages, the outcome of the war could have been drastically different. Their work in gathering intelligence, sometimes at great personal risk, ensured that Washington had the upper hand in several critical moments. The British, despite their military superiority, were often blinded by misinformation or a lack of timely intelligence, giving the Americans opportunities to strike when least expected. The members of the Culper Ring may not have wielded muskets or fought on the front lines, but their contributions were equally vital. They were the eyes and ears of the Continental Army, gathering intelligence, exposing British plans, and ensuring Washington's strategy was built on solid, up-to-date information. In many ways, the Culper Ring epitomizes the often overlooked role of intelligence in warfare. Sometimes, the most decisive victories are won without ever firing a shot. And it was this invisible network of spies and couriers that helped secure America's independence. Agent 355 remains one of the most enigmatic and compelling figures in the espionage network of the American Revolution, particularly within the Culper Ring. Her name, like so many spies from that era, is cloaked in secrecy, and much of what is known about her is based on speculation, with only a few tantalizing clues left behind to fuel the imagination of historians. The number 355 was not only her code name, but also an integral part of the Culper Ring's method of assigning unique identifiers to agents to protect their true identities. In the world of espionage, especially during such a precarious and dangerous time, being anonymous was crucial. Even today, historians still debate the true identity of Agent 355. Some believe she was an affluent socialite living among the British, while others suggest she may have been a loyalist sympathizer, using her position to gain insight into British strategies and operations. One of the theories posits that Agent 355 was likely a member of the Townsend family, closely connected to Robert Townsend, Culper Jr., one of the key players in the Culper Ring. The Townsend family had significant social and business connections that could have provided Agent 355 with access to British officers and critical intelligence. If this is true, her role in the network would have been pivotal, offering a level of access and discretion that was essential to getting information to Washington undetected. Other theories suggest that she may have been involved in the social circles of New York City, moving freely between British officials and American patriots, all while remaining under the radar of British intelligence. Her connections could have enabled her to overhear sensitive conversations, gather scraps of information, and pass them along to the right people at the right time. In a world where women were largely relegated to domestic roles, it was precisely this ability to navigate the social landscape unnoticed that made her so valuable. Despite the uncertainty about her identity, there's little doubt that Agent 355's contributions were invaluable to the success of the Culper Ring. She was one of the few individuals capable of passing information directly to General Washington's forces, helping to uncover British plans and coordinate vital intelligence. It's believed that her intelligence reports included details on British troop movements, intentions to cut off supplies, and even the planning of covert missions that might have otherwise gone unopposed. Unfortunately, the full scope of her work, and her ultimate fate, remains a mystery. Some speculate that she was eventually caught by the British, possibly during the Ring's activities in 1780, but the details of her capture or death, if it occurred, have never been confirmed. It is said that she disappeared from history as quietly as she entered it, a victim of the very secrecy she had so expertly navigated throughout her espionage career. Though Agent 355 may have never received the fame and recognition she deserved, her role highlights the often overlooked but critical contributions of women in wartime intelligence. Her story is a testament to the courage, ingenuity, and resourcefulness of women who fought alongside men in their own quiet way, shaping the outcome of history from the shadows. Whether her true identity is ever uncovered or not, Agent 355's legacy will always remain an integral part of the American Revolution's espionage history. Women played a crucial, albeit often overlooked, role in the espionage efforts during the American Revolution, and their contributions were indispensable to the success of the revolutionary cause. While men are frequently celebrated for their bravery on the front lines, women quietly and resourcefully worked behind the scenes, gathering and delivering critical intelligence that often went undetected by British forces. Their ability to blend into their environments, often unnoticed due to societal expectations of their roles, made them ideal spies for the fledgling American cause. Couriers were among the most important roles women took on in the spy network. Women used their everyday lives as cover for their dangerous missions. They would sew secret messages into the seams of clothing, stitch them into dresses, or hide them in the brims of hats. These everyday items became conduits for critical information, passed from one person to another without arousing suspicion. The mundane acts of daily life, sewing, dressing, and even cooking, were transformed into covert operations. The messages they carried often detailed troop movements, British strategies, or vital plans for rebellion. But the espionage didn't stop there. Women also posed as domestic servants in British households, a role that gave them unprecedented access to British officers and loyalist sympathizers. These women were able to eavesdrop on private conversations between officers, picking up sensitive information about military plans, supply routes, and vulnerabilities that could be exploited by American forces. As servants, they were invisible, moving within the British officers' circles without drawing attention. The British, underestimating the potential of these women, were unaware that some of their most confidential discussions were being overheard and passed on to rebel networks. Perhaps one of the most famous examples is Martha Washington, who, while not an active spy herself, helped organize and maintain the covert intelligence efforts that supported Washington's war strategy. Many other women, such as Sarah Livingston Jay, wife of the future Chief Justice John Jay, used their positions in society to gain access to British intelligence. Sarah, for example, used her social status to entertain British officers and glean information that could be valuable to the Continental Army. One particularly remarkable story involves Agent 355, who operated within the Culper Ring, but she wasn't alone. There were also women like Lydia Dara, a Quaker woman from Philadelphia, who risked her life to warn George Washington's army of a British surprise attack. Dara overheard the British officers discussing their plans for an ambush and, despite the risks, crossed British lines to deliver the warning to American forces, saving countless lives. Additionally, many women were involved in seamstress work or manufacturing for the Continental Army, and they would use these legitimate business activities as covers for espionage. They would make clothing or uniforms for the soldiers while secretly passing along vital information hidden within the garments. Their work often went unnoticed in plain sight, making them invaluable to the network of spies operating throughout the colonies. The strategic role of women in espionage also laid the groundwork for the more formalized roles women would take on in later conflicts. Their contributions helped create a foundation for the importance of covert intelligence that would be recognized and refined in subsequent wars, including the Civil War and World Wars I and II. The courage and ingenuity of these women are a testament to the fact that espionage isn't just about brute force. It's about stealth, resourcefulness, and utilizing every opportunity, even those that seem most mundane. Their intelligence-gathering efforts were crucial to the success of the American Revolution. Though history may not always remember their names, these women were vital to the outcome of the war, and their quiet acts of bravery and sacrifice were essential in winning America's independence. Exactly. The very invisibility of women in society during the American Revolution worked to their advantage in the world of espionage. While British officers were busy focusing on the military men, soldiers, with muskets, generals with strategies, and commanders with power, women seamlessly slipped through the cracks of suspicion. They were often underestimated, seen as nothing more than caregivers, wives, and daughters, relegated to the domestic sphere, which made them the perfect operatives in a covert war. Women's roles as household managers, mothers, and socialites allowed them to engage in intelligence gathering in ways that the British simply didn't anticipate. Parlors and private gatherings were natural settings for clandestine meetings, where women could exchange crucial information under the guise of polite conversation or casual visits. These social spaces, where political discourse often took place, became informal hubs for espionage. In fact, the idea that the domestic space could be a front for revolutionary activities was revolutionary in itself. Women knew how to navigate these spaces without raising suspicion, gathering whispers of British plans or passing along important messages that would be crucial for the success of the Continental Army. The nature of espionage in these contexts was also deeply personal. Women often used their relationships and social standing to infiltrate British circles. Some women, like Catherine Katy Green, the wife of General Nathaniel Greene, were able to play crucial roles in supporting the war effort by fostering relationships with key individuals, some of whom may have been British sympathizers or even officers. Katy Green was known for her charm and intelligence, cultivating relationships that proved vital for gathering information. In a similar vein, women who worked as servants in British households had an unobtrusive opportunity to listen in on conversations, catch valuable tidbits of intelligence, and pass it on to the rebels, often without ever being suspected of their true role. In addition to these personal relationships, women took advantage of the mundane chores and everyday tasks that filled their lives. Laundry, sewing, cooking, these routine activities were often the perfect cover for the more dangerous work of espionage. As they sewed, cooked, or tended to household chores, they could stitch coded messages into seams, hide notes in flour, sacks, or pass along secrets hidden within their everyday work. Messages could be passed without anyone thinking twice about it. An innocuous conversation at the market or a routine delivery of goods could be the perfect chance to hand off vital information. Perhaps most striking is how these women balanced their domestic roles with their commitment to the American cause. They maintained households, cared for children, and managed farms, all while operating as spies in a time when their actions could have resulted in imprisonment, torture, or worse. Yet, they did this in a way that was integral to the survival of the revolution. These women didn't simply support the war, they shaped its outcome. Through their courage, intelligence, and resourcefulness, women proved that espionage was not limited to men with muskets. Agent 355, Lydia Dara, and countless other women embodied the idea that wars are won not only on battlefields, but in the shadows. Their ability to work quietly and effectively, often without recognition or reward, made them the unsung heroes of the revolution. It's impossible to overstate just how vital their contributions were. Without these secretive yet strategic actions, the revolution would not have been the success it was. The patriotic women of the American Revolution may not have been remembered in the history books as often as the soldiers, but their actions were nothing short of revolutionary in their own right. In an age where women were typically confined to the home, these spies defied the expectations of society, proving that intelligence and courage know no gender. Their contributions were essential to the revolution's success, and without their stealth and resourcefulness, the outcome of the war could have been very different. One of the most infamous betrayals in history, Benedict Arnold's defection to the British side, shattered American trust and exposed the dangerous world of double agents during the Revolutionary War. Arnold, once a celebrated American hero, became a turncoat after growing disillusioned with the Continental Army. he secretly began communicating with the British, offering them vital information in exchange for money and a promised position within the British military. His most notorious act was attempting to surrender the strategically crucial fort at West Point to the British, a move that would have devastated the American cause. Arnold's betrayal was uncovered just in time, thanks to the very intelligence networks he had once trusted. His British contact, Major John Andre, was captured while carrying messages from Arnold, leading to a dramatic showdown. The discovery of Arnold's plot was a bitter blow to the revolutionaries, but it also highlighted the growing importance of counterintelligence. Major John Andre himself became a key figure in British espionage. A skilled and charismatic officer, Andre worked as a spy for the British, using his charm and intelligence to infiltrate American lines. His dealings with Arnold were part of a broader effort to undermine the revolution by sowing distrust among American leaders. When Andre was captured by American forces, he became a symbol of the dangers posed by double agents and espionage, even though his execution was controversial, as he was seen as more of a victim of war than a true villain. The revelation of Benedict Arnold's betrayal had profound effects on the war effort. It forced both sides to reevaluate how they handled intelligence and counterintelligence. The Americans became much more vigilant, tightening their own spy networks and improving their ability to detect traitors. It was a turning point in the war where both sides began to understand the true power of espionage, not just gathering secrets, but also preventing and exposing them. The need for secure communication, disguised movements, and constant vigilance against double agents became paramount as the war progressed, and the art of counterintelligence would evolve dramatically from that point forward. This espionage game, played in the shadows, would continue to shape the course of history long after the American Revolution had ended. The lessons learned about the risks of betrayal and the importance of protecting one's secrets became the foundation of modern intelligence work. Espionage during the American Revolution wasn't just about gathering information, it was about passing that information without anyone else knowing. Spies relied on a range of ingenious tools and techniques to encode their messages, each one designed to keep secrets hidden from prying eyes. Let's dive into some of the most fascinating methods they used. Ciphers were one of the most commonly used tools in the spycraft of the time. One of the most famous was the Caesar cipher, a simple substitution cipher where each letter in the message is replaced by one a fixed number of positions down the alphabet. For example, with a shift of 3, A would become D, B would become E, and so on. These ciphers could be deciphered only by those who knew the key, making them effective for securely sending information. Another tool used extensively was invisible ink, particularly gallic acid, a substance that would disappear when it dried on paper, becoming visible only when exposed to heat. This was a clever way to hide messages. Spies would write a letter in invisible ink, which would remain blank until it was heated over a candle or near a fire. Washington's agents used this method frequently, allowing them to write delicate information without worrying about the letter being intercepted. Masked letters were also commonly used. This technique involved writing a message using regular, seemingly innocent words, but when read in a particular pattern or with the help of a key, the true meaning would be revealed. For instance, a letter might talk about something mundane, like a visit to a market or a walk in the garden, but if you took the first letter of every line, you might reveal a secret message. This allowed spies to communicate in plain sight without drawing suspicion. Signal flags were also an important part of battlefield espionage. They were used to communicate across long distances, signaling troop movements or sending messages without needing to speak. The British and Americans each had their own systems, with specific patterns of flags representing different messages. When used effectively, they allowed commanders to coordinate actions even if they were miles apart, all while remaining out of view of the enemy. Let's try something interactive. Imagine we intercepted a message from a spy using the Caesar cipher. Here's a sample message that's been encoded with a shift of 3. The original message was, "Meet at midnight" encoded. It looks like this. PIODW plug key call AKW. Now let's decode it. If we shift each letter 3 places back, we get the original message. Meet at midnight. This simple cipher was enough to confuse the British, but with the right knowledge, spies on the American side could easily read the messages and act accordingly. The ingenuity and secrecy behind these techniques were key to how the revolution was fought and won. By using these tools and their brilliant minds, spies could pass information through enemy lines, all while avoiding detection and ensuring that each message reached its intended recipient. Espionage during the American Revolution didn't just collect secrets, it directly impacted critical moments that ultimately turned the tide in favor of the Continental Army. The intelligence gathered through covert operations shaped military strategies, influenced key decisions, and played a pivotal role in securing victory. One of the most significant moments where espionage proved invaluable was during the evacuation of New York in 1783. After years of occupation, the British forces were planning to pull out of New York, a key city they had held since the early days of the war. American intelligence learned of the British withdrawal plans well in advance, thanks to a series of well-timed spies and informants embedded within British ranks. This allowed Washington and his forces to prepare for the British departure, setting the stage for a final victory. Without this critical intel, the withdrawal might have been a surprise, potentially giving the British forces time to regroup or escape in a more coordinated fashion. Another key moment where intelligence played a major role was in securing the French alliance. For years, Washington and his fellow leaders knew that France's involvement was essential for victory, but they also understood that they needed to prove they were capable of fighting on their own before the French would commit. The Culper Ring and other spies gathered detailed information about British troop movements, morale, and plans, all of which were used to convince the French that the Americans were a serious force. This information helped France decide to enter the war, providing not only much-needed military support but also financial backing. The French alliance was a game-changer, shifting the balance of power in the war and ensuring that the Americans were not alone in their fight. Perhaps the most decisive use of espionage came during the Yorktown campaign. In 1781, Washington and his generals needed to trap the British army led by General Cornwallis at Yorktown, but they had to do so without alerting the British to their movements. Through a network of spies and secret communications, Washington received vital intelligence that Cornwallis had become overconfident and was unaware of the growing American and French forces moving toward him. The intelligence gathered in the weeks leading up to the siege was crucial in planning a successful encirclement and cutting off Cornwallis's supply lines. It was espionage that made the difference in knowing when to strike and when to wait, leading to one of the most decisive victories of the war. Through all these operations, Washington was obsessively secretive about intelligence. He understood the power of espionage, not just in gathering information, but in protecting it. He demanded that spies use false identities, that no one knew too much, and that all messages were encrypted or hidden. Washington's commitment to secrecy became legendary, and it was this obsession with safeguarding information that allowed the Continental Army to outwit their British counterparts time and time again. In a war where every advantage counted, espionage proved to be one of the most important and least recognized tools in securing American independence. By relying on spies and covert strategies, Washington and his forces were able to turn the tide in their favor and achieve what many thought was impossible: victory against one of the world's most powerful empires. The legacy of espionage during the American Revolution extends far beyond the 18th century, influencing the development of modern American intelligence agencies, including the CIA and the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the CIA. The strategies and methods developed by figures like George Washington and the members of the Culper Ring laid the groundwork for the intelligence community that would later define the United States' global presence in the 20th century. Washington's deep understanding of secrecy, counterintelligence, and the importance of maintaining covert operations resonated through history. The CIA, founded in 1947, and its predecessor, the OSS, were shaped by lessons learned from the American Revolution. The idea of operating in the shadows, using agents who could blend into enemy territory without drawing attention, was first honed in the Revolutionary War. These early lessons in ciphering, invisible ink, and double agents were refined and expanded as the U.S. entered the Cold War, fighting a new kind of silent battle with the Soviet Union. Washington's methods were also a masterclass in counterintelligence, the art of protecting one's own secrets while infiltrating the enemy's ranks. The Continental Army learned early on that keeping enemy secrets was just as important as gathering their intelligence. This lesson would resonate with future generations of American spies, where secrecy and security became paramount in operations, such as during the World War II-era Manhattan Project, where the U.S. had to ensure that its atomic secrets were protected at all costs. However, despite the successes of revolutionary spies, there are still many myths versus facts when it comes to understanding the full scope of their contributions. For example, while Agent 355's identity remains one of the most tantalizing mysteries, some historians believe she may have been several different women, rather than a single person. The truth behind her actions and impact is still debated. Similarly, Benedict Arnold's betrayal has often been romanticized, with some portraying him as a tragic hero, failing to account for the fact that his greed and lust for power led him to jeopardize the lives of thousands of soldiers. Also, the espionage efforts during the Revolution weren't always as efficient as we like to imagine. Early intelligence failures, such as the inability to prevent major British victories at places like the Battle of Brooklyn, highlighted the struggles of creating an organized network in the early days of the war. It took time and numerous setbacks for the Continental Army to develop the spycraft that would eventually give them an edge. While the Culper Ring remains a celebrated example of early American intelligence, it's important to remember that its success wasn't instantaneous. The Ring struggled at times with miscommunications, leaks, and failures to capture vital information. Yet, despite these setbacks, their efforts ultimately paved the way for the intelligence systems we know today. As we look back at the Revolutionary War and its spy networks, we can see that the foundations for modern intelligence work were built from the shadows, with careful planning, unyielding dedication, and the occasional dose of luck. The stories of these early spies may be shrouded in mystery, but the impact of their work is undeniable. Their influence on American intelligence continues to be felt today, as their methods and philosophies help to shape the future of espionage. Intelligence played a pivotal role in America's fight for freedom. From secret messages written in invisible ink to the network of spies operating in plain sight, the shadow war fought by these unsung heroes was just as important as the battles on the front lines. The efforts of men and women alike, gathering intelligence, sending coded messages, and outsmarting the British, shaped the course of the American Revolution and helped secure the country's independence. Without espionage, the outcome of the war could have been drastically different. Now I want to hear from you. Which revolutionary spy would you want to be? Would you take on the role of the elusive Agent 355, or maybe the cunning Abraham Woodhull? Drop your thoughts in the comments below! And make sure to stay tuned for our next video, the real stories behind America's most notorious traitors. We'll dive into the lives of those who betrayed their country during pivotal moments in history. You won't want to miss it.